Just before Christmas, in the long ago year of 2019, the gaming world was rocked by an announcement unlike any other. Jesus Christ was coming to PC. In a minute-long trailer for a game called I Am Jesus Christ, the player as Jesus heals the sick, produces a dozen fish, and quells the stormy sea, all with first-person magical hands action. In a classic example of the preview revealing too much, it also shows us the climax of the story, Jesus crucified alongside the good and unrepentant thieves. In the logo reveal, Jesus himself forms the I in the game's title, I am Jesus Christ. We even get a sneak peek at his hands rolling open the door of his would-be tomb. No wonder this trailer has 7 million views. It's a greatest hits collection. There were a variety of reactions to this trailer. Most of the comments on YouTube are laughing at its obvious absurdity. One of them says, "Can't wait to see where the story goes. Hopefully one of my party members won't betray me near the end." On a Christian subreddit, reactions are largely negative. Cash grab, blasphemous, an opportunity for the hardened to bitterly mock and repudiate the gospel and the Lord. But I saw this trailer and thought, hey, they're finally making a game about a guy like me. Sorry, no, not the Messiah. They're finally making a game starring a Jewish guy. 8 months before I Am Jesus Christ was announced, I made a video called Judaism and Whiteness in Wolfenstein, which, among other things, discussed the Jewish identity of B.J. Blazkowicz in Machine Games' modern Wolfenstein series. Towards the end of that video, I said there aren't many Jewish game characters, almost none, and showed this user-made list from Giant Bomb's website. The description of the list reads, and I quote, "If you ever know if there are Jewish characters in video games, that this list is for you." The first 3 entries on the list are biblical, the next 10 are mostly X-Men, and then the list descends into hilarious entries like Ron Stoppable, Tommy Pickles, and Willow from Buffy the Vampire Slayer, all of whom are technically characters in video games. Determining Judaism in games often stems from technicality. Gage, a DLC character from Borderlands 2, will occasionally say, "It's like Hanukkah" when opening a chest, and so she has been permanently given a spot on the short list of Jewish video game characters. There are times when Judaism can exist as more than a throwaway line in a video game. B.J. Blazkowicz is one example. An even higher profile character might be Dina from The Last of Us 2. That game features a whole level in a synagogue that spurs multiple conversations about Dina's identity. We learn that, despite not being much of a believer, Dina still thinks of herself as coming from a long line of survivors, which is a very Jewish feeling to have. But for every Dina, there's also an Otacon from Metal Gear Solid, who is apparently Jewish, based on the 1998 Metal Gear Solid official mission handbook, and nothing else. The more interesting question than simply are there Jewish characters is, does it mean anything in-game? Dina's Judaism isn't core to The Last of Us's narrative, but it does clearly influence how she thinks of herself. But Otacon, the otaku dork who pisses himself, what depth does his character gain by being silently, invisibly Jewish? Which brings us back to I Am Jesus Christ, a game where the protagonist is not just a Jew, but probably the most famous Jew of all time, or at least tied with Adam Sandler. The only problem, at least based on that first trailer, is, well, what is the game exactly? Although the scenes of Jesus performing miracles are accompanied by some sort of meter going down, everything we're seeing is obviously pre-rendered. If this was at a major games conference, it would have not in-game footage slapped on the bottom of the screen. The preview really feels like the beginnings of a thought experiment. What if someone made a game about Jesus, turned into a commercial, without any further consideration of what the mechanics might be? But me of little faith, a mere 3 years after that initial trailer, I Am Jesus Christ became available on Steam. Or the prologue did, at least. There have, in fact, been 2 different prologues for I Am Jesus Christ. The first, released in 2022, has since been delisted. The second, rising again in 2025, contains similar content to the first, but features an entirely new map, gameplay mechanics, and, judging by the banner image and voice acting, a newfound love of AI.
When they had seen him, they spread the word concerning what had been told them about this child.
Each demo gives you the ability to play a surprisingly hefty chunk of Jesus' life, complete with far more mechanics than I expected. I Am Jesus Christ, prologue, features dialogue choices, an open world, missions, combat, a hunger meter, a fishing minigame. Much like Rock Band or Watch Dogs 2, completing missions awards Jesus Christ with new followers. Much like Geralt or Batman, Jesus Christ can shift into detective vision and follow a blood trail. And, don't worry, gamers. Everyone is white. Mary looks like she's about to doubt your commitment to sparkle motion. It is weird in the way that a game about Jesus Christ would necessarily be weird. It's also cheesy in the way that gamifying miracles would necessarily be cheesy. In maybe the silliest section, immediately after resisting Satan in the desert for 40 days, the player as Jesus arrives at a wedding only to learn of a crisis. The guests have already drunk all the wine. Please use your powers for good, Mary begs you. The wedding party only has these big jugs of water, but as a pop-up tutorial informs us, you can turn water into wine by first pressing right-click and then holding left-click. Do it 3 times in order to complete the miracle. After playing this section, I was flabbergasted that the game had contextualized one of Jesus' most famous miracles in this way, and then I went and read John 2:1 and realized that, oh, this is almost exactly beat for beat what happens in the book. Many of the sections of the game are like this, goofy in the same way that the Bible can be goofy. I haven't found the verse that details Jesus' skill at solving minor physics puzzles by controlling gravity and hurling cubes, but maybe it's an extension of his carpentry, who's to say. With this in mind, the weakest part of the game is, forgive me, the weakest part of the Jesus story writ large. That is, how little we know about him. After briefly touching on his birth in the manger, the game immediately skips ahead 30 years, fast-forwarding to just before Jesus' baptism by John the Baptist. So much for character development. Stephen Mitchell's book, The Gospel According to Jesus, grapples with the challenge of understanding who Jesus was, stripped back from thousands of years of editions and translations. We know so little about his life, Mitchell writes, a very few facts and no more. He was baptized by John the Baptist, he taught, he healed, he was crucified by the Romans. The rest is silence, probabilities, and hints. We know nothing about Jesus' enlightenment experience, which changed him from carpenter to master, from son of a whore to a son of God. What that means for the game, a game as bluntly titled as I Am Jesus Christ, is that the player controls a character with essentially no interiority. Although levels may send Jesus on magic school bus-esque adventures to heal the son of a royal official by zapping the virus inside him with holy power, it only succeeds in telling us what Jesus did, without giving us any insight into what being the Son of God might have, felt like. Which you'd think would be what an interactive version of the Jesus story might excel at. The contradiction that I Am Jesus Christ faces is that creating an engaging game in which you play as Christ is going to require some interpretation, a take on the Son of God, but I Am Jesus Christ is intensely uncurious about the man at its center, content to play those greatest hits over and over. In fact, a 2023 communication from its developer advertised that you can now buy, quote, a beautiful book based on the stunning images from the game along with AI-generated quotes from the Bible. Perhaps the single most creatively bankrupt sentence ever written. A year later, the developer's official Discord was overrun with porn bots. To state the obvious, despite starring a Jew, I Am Jesus Christ is not a Jewish game, nor is it made for a Jewish audience. Finding Judaism in I Am Jesus Christ is an exercise in the kind of interpretation the game refuses to do. You could see Tikkun Olam, the Jewish concept of repairing the world, in Jesus' drive to heal and help the people around him, but even that is an assumption of motivation beyond anything the game actually gives us. Instead, I Am Jesus Christ exists in the same realm as the Brick Bible, Veggie Tales, or Chick Tracts, utilizing a popular medium in an attempt to make classic Christian teachings exciting for the youth. This is not the first time video games have attempted such a thing. In fact, I Am Jesus Christ follows in the footsteps of some of the most famous, or infamous, games of the 20th century. A short history lesson. Back in the days of the NES, Nintendo controlled access to their mega-hit console in a very physical way. Every game cartridge for the system had to include a special microchip, only known to Nintendo. This meant it was impossible to produce any NES games without Nintendo's blessing and outside of their content guidelines, or I should say, almost impossible. In 1988, two men, James Chan and Dan Lawton, developed a second kind of NES cartridge. Instead of including the special microchip, their design literally shocked the authenticator with a voltage spike, momentarily disabling it and letting non-Nintendo approved games be played on the NES. Dan Lawton used this workaround to make unlicensed games about Jews. Although Lawton's original development company, Color Dreams, published a few unremarkable unlicensed titles for the NES, its fate was ultimately set in motion by a joke. According to Gabe Durham's reporting on the subject, one day Lawton riffed that they ought to, quote, make a game with Jesus jumping around. A year or two later, Bible Adventures for the NES hit store shelves and sold hundreds of thousands of copies.
Do you ever worry that they're playing too much Nintendo?
Oh, not anymore. See, Matt has Bible Adventures. They're actually learning Bible stories while they're playing Nintendo.
Quick, get that Bible quote before you run out of power.
The success of Bible Adventures is inextricably tied to its bizarre status as an unlicensed NES game. It is, on its face, ironic that a game theoretically espousing the virtues of the Bible would use an electric shock to bypass content censors. But those unlicensed cartridges weren't technically breaking any laws. It was just heavily frowned upon by Nintendo. Most game stores, afraid of losing Nintendo's good graces, only stocked licensed games. But you know who didn't care about the good graces of a video game company? Christian bookstores. Lawton & Co. rebranded their development studio to the appropriately devout-sounding Wisdom Tree and started marketing their games directly to Christian retailers. And yet, despite Lawton's original joke about Jesus jumping around, the most famous of Wisdom Tree's games are firmly Old Testament. Bible Adventures, released in 1991 for the NES, is actually a collection of 3 games. The first game, according to biblical chronology, is Noah's Ark, in which the player as Noah holds large stacks of animals above his head and throws them onto the ark. There's not much else that happens in the game, and more importantly, Noah is technically pre-Abraham and thus not actually Jewish, so I am disqualifying Noah's Ark from further conversation. Next up is Baby Moses, which is maybe the most conceptually interesting of the 3, because you don't actually control Moses, but his mother, Yochebed. Set within Exodus, Baby Moses takes the 2 biblical sentences about hiding Moses among the reeds on the Nile and blows it out to a daring escape scene in which Yochebed holds the infant Moses above her head and sprints through Egypt, dodging guards, dive-bombing birds, and piles of spiders. Much like Noah could lift and hurl animals, Yochebed can lift and hurl her own son, even chucking the baby prophet directly into the river. There is, for the record, no reason to do this, but the option is available. In fact, the game doesn't even end if you prematurely drop Moses in the Nile. You can finish out the level, only to be informed, good work, but you forgot baby Moses. Ascribing overt intentionality to the situations picked for Bible Adventures would be a mistake. Developer Dan Burke said in conversation with Gabe Durham, "It was like doing a game about Cthulhu. What's the Cthulhu lore? They would just crack open the Bible, and there was your story. Noah's Ark, there's a story right there. But I do find it interesting that, however accidentally, Bible Adventures is engaging in something almost like Talmudic commentary. Yochebed is mentioned by name only twice in the Old Testament, both in those long lists of family trees the Torah is so good at. Even when she births Moses, she's described only as a Levite woman. Additional information about Yochebed, for instance that she was conceived on the way to Egypt, is extra-textual writing added by biblical scholars like the illustrious Rashi. Baby Moses, as a game, teaches almost nothing about the literal text of Exodus, but its incidental fleshing out of Yochebed as not simply a Levite woman, but a mother with some level of agency and sense of responsibility feels almost Jewish? I mean, of course it's a stretch, but look at what I'm working with here. In the last game in the collection, David and Goliath, you play as David, the young shepherd who kills Goliath and eventually becomes king. Finally, an exciting story for a game. I can only imagine the boss fights that... Oh, it's another game about carrying animals? Okay. You do get to throw a rock at Goliath at the end, at least. What I haven't said explicitly yet is that Bible Adventures is not a good video game. You could call it terrible. It controls poorly, the levels feel near random, there's very little interesting design. The most fascinating thing about Bible Adventures, and the later Wisdom Tree games, which include the trivia-based Bible Buffet, a Zelda-esque spiritual warfare, and the infamous first-person shooter Super 3D Noah's Ark, is the fact that they exist at all. A key difference between Judaism and Christianity is the Christian directive to convert non-believers, to evangelize, to spread the good news. Even though many of these games star Jews, they are games based in Christianity, purchased by parents and churches in the Christian hope of using faith-based pop culture to grab the attention of the young and non-converted. Although there is plenty of Jewish pop culture, vanishingly little of it is actually made with the intent of converting the goyim. No one jumped in the mikveh because of Mel Brooks. Instead, what defines Jewish media is more nebulous, the indefinable idea of a Jewish perspective, one of those things that often boils down to, I know it when I see it. In the realm of video games, it's often easier to see it when the project comes from a single person or small team. In my own vibes-based research, I've found the most commonly cited Jewish video game might be the Shivah, a 2006 indie point-and-click detective game from developer Wadjet Eye Games. And I just want to say that again. The most commonly cited example is an independent point-and-click detective game from 2006 that is not a combination of words I associate with popularity. But the Shivah's impact as a game is due as much to its subject matter as to its genre. It is, undeniably and completely, a very Jewish game. One of the only of its kind. In the Shivah, you play as a rabbi-turned-private eye in a sort of noir pastiche set between two synagogues and various other locales in New York City. It feels very basic, especially in the context of today's indie games. The environments are small and static, the puzzles feel a bit random, the voice acting leaves a lot to be desired.
Today in my sermon I'd like to discuss suffering. Why do bad things happen to good people?
But there's also stuff in the Shivah that, for some reason, I just didn't think could be in a game. Things like Adon Olam being sung with the tune I recognize from my synagogue, or a computer in the game that gives you an endless stream of Jewish jokes, and not jokes about Jews, but jokes that I tell to my non-Jewish friends, and they go, wait, what was the punchline? There's the entire conversational shtick of the game, in which one of the dialogue options available to you is always the rabbinic response, which just means answering a question with another question. The game, in its 2013 re-release, even features a bonus commentary track from its director, Dave Gilbert, in which he provides additional insight on its creation and meaning, which is such a hilariously Jewish impulse that it also describes both the Talmud and my own book, How a Game Lives, available now. It's also a great genre match. For a culture like Judaism, so obsessed with asking questions and finding meaning, a detective game makes a ton of sense. And also, like many detective stories and many Jewish stories, it stars an asshole. You play as Russell Stone, a gruff rabbi in charge of an ailing synagogue. You're tasked with investigating the murder of a former congregant, an investigation complicated by the fact that Rabbi Stone himself threw out this congregant years prior for getting an interfaith marriage. It's a decent story, one that grapples with the familiar Jewish themes of what one owes to their faith, their own community, and the outside world. It's nothing groundbreaking, though, except for the fact that, as previously stated, it has become the go-to example of a Jewish video game. Dave Gilbert, the game's creator, seems uncomfortable with this status. He's posted since that he didn't want it to be the go-to example of a Jewish video game, that he feels like he got a lot of things wrong, that he himself isn't that religious and is only culturally Jewish, and I hate to say it, Dave, but that's kind of the most Jewish thing you could feel about your video game. Fortunately, and despite its reputation, the Shivah isn't the only overtly Jewish game ever made. A venture into the fiercely independent and unpolished archives of itch.io uncovers many more Jewish games of all different sorts. On one hand, we have something like Who Shall Wander, in which you navigate a desert avoiding Christian missionaries and answering quiz questions on Jewish values in order to earn mitzvah points. This is a game I could imagine playing at Hebrew school, silly and light, but technically more fun than a lecture. On the other hand, there's the game From the Earth. This is a horror retelling of the Golem of Prague story in which you, as the rabbi, rip out your eyes, teeth, lungs, and heart in order to animate the clay protector. It is cool and gnarly, and distinctly something we would not play in Hebrew school. And then, there are the personal explorations of Jewish culture and history, like Hineni, a story of an awkward teen boy wrestling with ideas of queerness, family, and faith, or Onthecht, a documentation of the developer's great-grandparents being torn from their home in Amsterdam and killed in Sobibor. These are beautifully small and specific games, interested more in a sense of legitimacy than broad appeal. But the best versions of this style that I've played do not bill themselves as Jewish games at all. They are the point-and-click memoirs Perfect Tides and its sequel Station to Station, which depict the trials and tribulations of a fictionalized version of the game's director, Meredith Gran. The first game, Perfect Tides, takes place on a small East Coast island while protagonist Mara Whitefish is in high school. But despite literally being named Whitefish, Judaism is not a huge part of Mara's life. It is mainly something that happens to her, like her fear that Hitler may have faked his death and escaped to the woods of her island where he now, over 100 years old, waits to ambush her. Or her rage that her brother's new insistence on celebrating Sukkot is interrupting her plans.
Since when do we celebrate Sukkot? The holiday no one cares about, even more useless than Purim.
Judaism is something inherited from her dead father, a cocktail of identity and traditions that only exist to inconvenience her. When she tells her friends that she can't hang, she IMs,
"It's a long story, but basically I'm Jewish."
The island itself has the same sense of fading identity. A long-defunct hotel on the island was once a haven for the Jewish population of the state, but it's now a beautifully graffitied husk, a place to sit and think about what's slipped away. The game ends with the first night of Hanukkah, a full recitation of the prayers by Mara's brother. You get the sense that he is attempting to absorb the role of his father and his faith. Mara can't find it. If only you didn't stand outside belief, looking in from this lonesome void, the narrator commiserates. But there is something she finds in the tradition, a comfort despite her feeling of alienation. Mara is 16 in the first game. In the next Station to Station, she's 18. She's going to school in the city, in essentially New York. There are similar ways Judaism happens to her here. Discussions of who is or isn't Goyish, a story about her brother hiding the Afikomen, an acquaintance who goes on birthright and gets, way too into it. But where Perfect Tides was largely a game where Mara struggled to decide what to think about herself, Station to Station is a game where Mara is learning how to think as an adult and a writer and an independent person, how to think about love, about art, and about the wider world. And in this pursuit, the threads of Judaism re-emerge in her life. In Station to Station, you will read many books, real books by Freud and Ursula Le Guin, Camus and Langston Hughes. These texts will expand your ability to understand and interact with the world and improve your skill at getting your own thoughts down on paper. And I understand. What I'm describing is basically just the concept of going to school. I get it. But in Mara's drive to learn and understand, her close readings and her skepticism of foundational texts, I see my own passion, and I see a Jewish way of understanding the world. An eagerness to support yourself with tradition while simultaneously questioning those same principles. I don't know if Mara is able to see it this way. At the end of the game, she visits her father's grave in a noticeably Jewish cemetery, and she expresses similar frustrations and guilt as the end of the first game. That sometimes she doesn't know if she's a Jew at all, that she doesn't believe in God and feels nothing in common with people who go to synagogue. Sometimes she says,
I think the only thing uniting us is the grief, the impossible sense of loss. I can't carry it with me all the time, Dad.
But she carries more than that. In the most beautiful moment of the game, she gazes out into the sunset and wonders, is home nothing more than a place from the past? No, she concludes. Surely there is a home within you, waiting to be known. Surely there is a way to find one's own spot in this cloud of other people's beliefs. If you never had another day, Dayenu. Judaism leaps to express what could otherwise only be felt. Perfect Tides Station to Station is one of my favorite memoir games ever, and one of the most legitimate feeling ways I've experienced of weaving personal struggles with Judaism into much larger questions of identity and finding oneself. It's also a minor indie release, currently sitting at well under 100 Steam reviews, and sometimes I wonder if this is the only realm for Jewish games. Niche, personal, probably unprofitable. We'll occasionally get a character like BJ Blazkowicz or Dina, but a whole big game, something AAA, something high budget, something worked on by dozens or hundreds of people, is there anything that could survive this process and emerge with a perspective on what it means to be Jewish? Well, I can think of one, but I can't quite decide how I feel about it. Bioshock, developed by 2K Boston and 2K Australia, is a game about Rapture, a dystopian Art Deco underwater city crumbling under some truly terrible political ideology. Since its release in 2007, it has largely been considered one of the best, or at least most influential games of the 21st century. It is also a game about Jews. Pound for pound, Bioshock almost certainly has the most Jewish cast members out of any AAA game ever made. Andrew Ryan, Dr. Steinman, Sander Cohen, Bridget Tenenbaum, Samuel Mariska, and Masha Lutz are all Jewish. I mean, my god. Bioshock is one of the most talked about games of all time. Why hasn't the Judaism of its characters been part of the conversation all along? Well, part of the answer is how official and canon the Jewishness of these characters actually is. While it's easy enough to read several of these names, Steinman, Cohen, and assume Judaism, the canon of Bioshock's Jewish characters has largely been confirmed in extra-textual interviews with the game's director Ken Levine. I don't think I was conscious of how Jewish it was until afterwards, he said in an interview with Cody Mello Klein. In fact, the words Jew, Jewish, and Judaism aren't even present in the game's script. Tannenbaum is the only character that states her personal connection to the religion, and even then, only by implication. Rapture, the city, is explicitly an atheist haven, a place where science and art won't be held back by the petty rules of religion. So what's going on here? Is Levine just retconning Bioshock into a Jewish game, a sort of Dumbledore was actually gay to an entire theme? No. I don't think he is. Though later Bioshock games would struggle much more with appropriately addressing identity, I am sympathetic to how hard it is to work through your own feelings and history about Judaism, let alone present those ideas to the public. To state the obvious, most of Bioshock's Jewish characters are more or less insane. Deranged doctors, unhinged artists, violent and self-deifying oligarchs. To add in text directly stating something like, hey, that plastic surgeon who grew bored of the human form so he started making Picassos out of people's actual faces, yeah, he's Jewish, would invite exactly the wrong kind of attention. I mean, take the main antagonist of the game, Andrew Ryan. Ryan shares his pre-Rapture history with his obvious ideological model, Ayn Rand. Rand, as much as I hate to admit it, was a Jew. Both she and Ryan were bourgeois Jews who immigrated to America in response to Russian Bolsheviks. Rand stayed in America, Ryan started an underwater city, both became insufferable writers. I think they would enthusiastically agree that their politics do not reflect Jewish values. And yet, Ryan can't help but frame his personal narrative religiously, saying that his journey to Rapture was his, quote, second exodus. His abandonment of his first home, his desire to create his own promised land, is a recurring motif in the history of Judaism. And Ryan isn't even the prickliest representation of Judaism in the game. That honor has to go to Brigid Tannenbaum. Tannenbaum is the closest the player gets to an actual friendly face in Rapture. She begs you not to kill the Little Sisters, girls that host valuable genetic resources. She leaves you gifts around the city, helps you defeat the big bad of the game, and is one of the only characters that doesn't ultimately betray you. Tannenbaum is also a Holocaust survivor. But we learn she survived the camps because she literally volunteered to help Dr. Mengele, took part in administering Nazi medical experiments. She lived because of her collaboration. And even afterwards in Rapture, she continued her inhumane experimentation, creating the horribly mutated girls she now wants us to save. Tannenbaum's story is not a heroic one of Jewish resistance. It is a much colder, much bleaker story of someone who is forced to become something less than human in order to survive. Her support throughout the narrative of the game does not come from the warmth of her spirit, but an unshakable guilt in her own complicity. Bioshock, especially viewed through the lens of Tannenbaum, is a piece of post-Holocaust fiction that refuses to valorize its characters' suffering. Cody Mello Klein, in his piece on the game, points out that this history deepens the game's central motif of agency and control. If the trauma of the past still controls our present, he writes, how much control do we really have? Bioshock remains famous for challenging players on their agency within a video game narrative, but how much more complex is this question for Jews, our list of traditions framed by near misses with annihilation? There is no glamour in Bioshock's Jewish representation, no valorization of the religion's tenacity, and this deeply uncomfortable introspection is possible because of the game's near-invisible use of Judaism. Because the culture is deployed as an unconscious connecting theme rather than an explicit plot point, Bioshock is able to create characters that don't have to serve as a beacon of representation. They are deeply broken people, and their personal histories and culture are wrapped around that brokenness. What feels most Jewish to me about Bioshock, though, more than its individual characters or individual creators, is the fact that I continue to wrestle with it. In asking what is a Jewish video game, an equally important question is what is a Jewish way of playing a game? Judaism is a religion of close reading, a tradition of creating new allegories and connections from stories written thousands of years ago. When I think about how I approach art, how I approach games, it is in this same tradition. We tell and retell the Passover story every year and still manage to find new things to talk about. Just because we've been yapping about Bioshock for nearly 2 decades now doesn't mean there's nothing left to say. Because when I play Bioshock today, I find my modern struggles with Judaism reflected right back at me. In the wake of the Holocaust, Andrew Ryan builds a purported promised land, and yet that promised land only perpetuates the violence it was meant to be a shelter from. How could our tradition possibly have brought us to this? Can I point at the unspeakable violence and cruelty and say this isn't Judaism? Or must that inhumanity be understood as a part of us too, not so easily excised from our cultural self-image? In one sense, a religion and a video game are both about following rules. The Torah has commandments, a game has objectives and limitations. You want to be good? Just follow those rules. They'll get you where you need to go. But this is a dull, incurious way of viewing both those things. The Judaism that I connect with is one that is made to be interrogated. Nothing should be taken for granted. Not those rules, not the goals of its institutions, not even a belief in God. And this, not coincidentally, is how I connect to games as well, not as a strict set of parameters, but as a new possibility space in which anything could be built. The past is there to be learned from, but not blindly followed. The future can, the future must continuously re-examine what we've done in order to learn how to be better. The best Jewish video game is the one not yet made, but one we have to believe is possible. While this essay took quite a long time to put together, it is not by any means a complete history of games about Judaism. One of the most notable exceptions is a game called Train, made by Brenda Romero. But Train is not a game you play on a PC or console, it's a board game about the Holocaust. And I am not really a board game guy, and so I've called in an expert. Exclusively on Nebula, you can watch a companion video to this one where I've pulled in Quentin Smith, better known as Quins of People Make Games and Quinn's Quest. We have a wide-ranging conversation on Train, the ability of a board game to communicate ideas about culture, other games that do this, the strange controversy with the book Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, and more. I mean, come on, it's Quins. You know the chat is good.
I think the paragraph you just said, like, it took minutes off my life, and I could feel it.
This is just where the metaphor of playing the game with history gets really complicated really fast.
I'll just tease it by saying it's a fascinating role-playing game which has the most awkward rule of all time.
If you like the kind of work I do here on YouTube, it's hard for me to imagine you wouldn't enjoy Nebula. It is a place where I'm free to explore other, more flexible types of videos, interviews, mini-essays, cooking shows, travelogues, without the ads or the crushing algorithmic pressure of YouTube. Nebula features many of my favorite essayists who consistently release early and or exclusive stuff there, and it is a fraction of the price of other streaming services. Less than $3 a month with my URL. Well under a cup of coffee a month at this point. Listen, in the lessons about how to be a successful video essayist, no one really recommends spending months making a thing about being Jewish and point-and-click adventure games. I am talking about this stuff because I care about it, and I can afford to do that because of the support Nebula provides me as a creator. So, if you appreciate this kind of thing, if you want to see more, if you just like giving me the time and flexibility to pursue topics like this, I really think you should consider Nebula. It's a video platform that doesn't make me feel guilty when I use it. In 2026, how about that? Use my code for a big discount and see what you've been missing.